The loud music made the walls shake, a loud beat that vibrated in Evelyn's chest. She shouldn't even be there. Black Velvet was no place for people like her, a legal assistant with no money for expensive champagne, no designer dresses, and of course no courage to walk through this room full of powerful men and dangerous secrets. But his boss asked for it. It was just a matter of delivering an envelope. "Quick stuff," he said. "You don't even need to enter properly." But now she was right in the middle of it. The strong smell of cigarettes and expensive perfume made the air heavy. Evelyn held the envelope to her chest and tried to go unnoticed. If she was lucky, she would soon deliver what she needed and disappear before anyone noticed that she didn't belong in that world. That's when the climate changed. First, the voices have subsided. Afterwards, some guys stopped laughing and looked at the entrance of the hall. She followed the looks and felt butterflies in her stomach. Damian Calloway. She had heard that name in the halls of the office, always in a low tone, as if talking about it out loud was dangerous. Owner of a fortune and businesses that no one openly commented on, Damian was much more than a businessman. He was the kind of man who made people look twice before crossing his path. And now he was there, tall, elegant, wearing a suit that seemed tailor-made for his imposing posture. He didn't have to say anything. The respect, or the fear, came just from being there. And then, Evelyn made a mistake. Her eyes met his. It was a second, but long enough for something to happen. A shiver ran down her spine, and she knew she had to get out of there. Now he turned quickly, his heart racing, but before he took 2 steps, he felt a firm grip on his arm. Lost? The deep voice came from one of Damian's security guards, a big man who looked like a wall in a suit. I was just leaving," he said, trying to sound firm. "Mr. Calloway wants to talk to you." Evelyn's stomach turned. She pulled her arm, but the security guard's hand didn't even move. "I think there was a mistake." But before he could finish the sentence, Damian approached. His gaze caught hers like invisible chains. "Who are you?" Evelyn took a deep breath. "No one." He tilted his head slightly, assessing his response. "No one doesn't look at me like that." She felt her heart miss a beat. I don't know what you're talking about." The corner of his mouth curled into a humorless smile. "Then why do you look so nervous?" Evelyn swallowed. He knew. And at that moment, she understood that she was not going to get out of there so easily. The silence between them felt like a stretched thread ready to break. Evelyn felt Damian's gaze piercing her, analyzing every detail, the subtle trembling of his fingers, the way his breathing quickened, the tension in his jaw. He understood everything. "I just came to deliver an envelope," he said, trying to sound firm. Damian kept his gaze locked to hers for a moment longer before extending his hand. With no choice, Evelyn handed him the envelope. He opened it, flipping through the contents unhurriedly. Then he looked up again, assessing her with an interest that made her swallow hard. "Who sent you?" "My boss, Mr. Larson." He gave a crooked, humorless smile. Larson should know that certain businesses are not resolved like that. Evelyn felt the panic grow. "I don't know anything about it. I just did what they asked me to do. Now can I go?" Damian did not answer. Instead, he turned slightly to the security guard next to him. "Take her." The air disappeared from Evelyn's lungs. "What? No!" She tried to back down, but steady fingers grabbed her wrist. "Don't shout," Damian warned, his voice low but loaded with authority. "No one here is going to help you." Desperation hit hard. Evelyn tried to break free, but the strength of the security guard was overwhelming. "I swear I didn't see anything." Damian approached, leaning slightly. Her eyes held her like invisible chains. "Then you have nothing to fear." The last thing Evelyn saw before she was dragged away was the dark back door of the club. The cold evening wind slammed into Evelyn's face as soon as the back doors of the club closed behind her. The place was a dark alley, lit only by an old lamppost flashing on the corner of the street. Her heart was beating so hard that it felt like she was going to jump out of her chest. 2 thugs held her tight by the arms, pushing her towards a black car parked nearby. The engine was already running. "Wait a minute!" She tried to let go, but it was like fighting a wall. "You can't take me like this." "Get in the car," said one of the security guards impatiently. "Let me go! I swear I didn't see anything." She struggled, pulling her arm, but only managed to annoy the guy who was holding her. That was when another presence appeared next to her. Damien. He didn't even have to raise his voice. "Come in!" The way he spoke sent a shiver down Evelyn's spine. It was not a request. It was an order. "You're making a mistake," she tried to argue, her voice shaking. Damien raised an eyebrow, as if he thought it was funny. "It was your mistake when you decided to look at me like that." Evelyn snorted, trying not to show the panic that was growing inside her. "That's ridiculous. I just came to deliver an envelope, nothing more." "Great," he said, opening the car door. "Then let's talk about it." She looked around, looking for a way out. Nothing. The street was deserted. If I tried to run, I wouldn't even get to the corner before I was caught again. Swallowing, she got into the car. The door closed with a firm click behind her. The driver accelerated smoothly, taking them to an unknown destination. Evelyn took a deep breath. I was screwed. The car slid through the dark streets of the city, and Evelyn felt panic tighten her chest at every corner they passed. The silence inside the vehicle was worse than any threat. Damien was sitting next to her, too quiet, as if he had all the time in the world. She, on the other hand, couldn't stop moving her hands, her thoughts racing a lot. "You can't just kidnap me like this," he blurted out suddenly, trying to keep his voice steady. Damien turned his face to her, the corner of his mouth curving into an almost amused smile. "Kidnapping? What an ugly word. I just want to talk." Evelyn snorted, crossing her arms. "You could have asked. You didn't have to throw me into a car." "But that's more interesting," he countered unhurriedly. She gritted her teeth. Worst of all was his calmness, as if he was sure she had no choice. "Where are we going?" Damien looked out the window, as if he was enjoying the city. A more reserved place. Her heart raced. "Look, I'm nobody. I just did a favor for my boss. I don't know anything. I didn't see anything. You can let me go now, and I swear I forget that night happened." He tilted his head, studying it again with that sharp gaze. "The problem, Evelyn," he said slowly, making a point of saying his name as if testing it on his tongue. "It's just that I don't like to take risks." She swallowed. The car pulled up softly in front of a tall, modern building with tinted windows. Damien opened the door and left first, unhurriedly. The security guard next to her didn't even have to say anything. Evelyn knew she had no option. He took a deep breath and got out of the car. If I was screwed before, now I saw no way out. The door to the building opened without Damien having to touch anything. A security guard as tall as a wall waited at the entrance, giving a slight nod before stepping aside for them to pass. Evelyn hesitated. "Come on," Damien said, not even looking back. She wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But for whom? The building seemed too quiet, the kind of place where no one asked questions. Swallowing, she followed. The elevator was huge, luxurious, with bright mirrors and a woody smell that matched Damien. He pressed a button and leaned against the wall, his eyes turned to her. Evelyn crossed her arms, trying to ignore the intense gaze. "Do you always drag strangers to your house like this?" Damien smiled at the singing. "Only when they look at me like that." "What way?" she countered, annoyed. He did not answer. The elevator opened and she was greeted by a huge apartment, with giant windows that overlooked the illuminated city. Everything was impeccable, sophisticated, and at the same time, intimidating. Damien walked to a bar in the corner of the room and poured himself a drink. "Do you want one? I want to leave." He took a sip of the drink and laughed softly. "Not yet." Panic tightened again in Evelyn's chest. "What do you want from me?" Damien placed the glass on the glass table and approached slowly, like a predator analyzing the prey. "I want to know why Larson sent you." She blinked, confused. "Because I work for him." "I already said I just did a favor." He didn't seem convinced. "Larson never sends anyone to Black Velvet for no reason, so tell me, Evelyn, what else is in that envelope?" She gritted her teeth. "You've already looked. He knows he only had documents." Damien tilted his head as if analyzing her every word. "Maybe, but I like to be sure." Evelyn took a deep breath. She knew that this was far from over. Evelyn felt a shiver run down her spine as Damien got closer. His gaze locked on her as if he could rip the truth straight out of her soul. "I've said everything I know." His voice came out firmer than he expected. "There's nothing strange about that envelope." He ran his hand over his chin, thoughtful. "If it's true, you have nothing to worry about." She laughed humorlessly. "Oh, of course, because being dragged here against my will was already a great sign that I'm safe." Damien smiled, but said nothing. That irritated her. He seemed to be in control of everything, as if nothing in the world could surprise him. She looked around, looking for a way out. The windows. No way, they were on top of a building. The door? Locked up for sure. Her only way was to convince him to let her go. "Look, if Larson is involved in something illegal, I don't know anything. I'm just an assistant." Damien narrowed his eyes as if evaluating her every word. "How long have you been working for him?" She hesitated. 1 year. "And you've never suspected anything?" Evelyn snorted. "I deal with contracts and spreadsheets, not my boss's dirty secrets." He was silent for a moment, as if he was deciding something. Then he turned and picked up a cell phone on the table. "I'll check this out." She frowned. "What do you mean, check?" Damien looked at her with an enigmatic smile. "I have my contacts. If you're telling the truth, I'll take you home. If not..." He shrugged. "We'll have to talk a little more." Evelyn felt her stomach turn. It was in his hands now, and she had no idea what was going to happen next. The silence that followed was suffocating. Evelyn watched Damien type something on his phone, as if he had all the time in the world. Every second of waiting felt like a wire tightening around his neck. She needed to think. He needed to find a way to get out of there before it was too late. What if you're wrong? He let go suddenly, crossing his arms to hide the trembling of his hands. Damien looked up at her, as if he was amused by her boldness. Wrong about what? About me. About this whole story. What if I'm really no one important? He tilted his head, studying her with that calculating look. So you have a terrible sense of direction, because it fell right into the middle of something much bigger than you think. Evelyn felt her heart race. If you know I'm not part of this, why don't you let me go? Because I'm not a man who bets on luck. She let out a bitter laugh. Oh, of course, you'd rather kidnap innocent people and wait for your contacts to decide for me. Damien smiled from the corner but didn't answer. Instead, his cell phone vibrated. He picked up the device and read the message. The expression didn't change, but Evelyn noticed the subtle tension on his shoulders. "What's wrong?" he asked, trying to sound indifferent. He stared at her for a moment, his eyes colder than before. "It sounds like you're telling the truth." She let out the air she didn't even realize she was holding. "Great. So now can I go?" Damien put his phone in his pocket and walked up to her slowly. Evelyn refused to back down, even when he stopped close enough that she could smell his woody scent. "I'll take you home," he said, quietly, almost gently. "But make no mistake, Evelyn, this is not over." A shiver ran down her spine. "What does that mean?" Damien gave an enigmatic smile before turning his back. "You'll find out." The silence in the car was different this time. It wasn't just fear. It was something darker, as if Evelyn was carrying a bomb ready to explode at any moment. Damien didn't say anything along the way. He just stood there quietly, looking out the window, as if the whole night had been just another routine business. Evelyn, on the other hand, was tense, her gaze fixed on the road, her fingers clenched in the fabric of her skirt. Every curve, every headlight, every minute inside that car seemed to stretch time, making everything more suffocating. "You're too quiet," Damien said suddenly, his voice calm but full of meaning. She let out a humorless laugh. "What did you expect? That I would start a conversation about the weather?" He smiled from the side. "I was hoping you'd ask why this isn't over yet." Evelyn felt a shiver. "What do you mean? You yourself said that I'm clean, so why not just forget me?" Damien turned his face to her, his dark eyes shining in the car's dim light. "Because there's something wrong with this story, and I don't like loose ends." She swallowed. "What does this have to do with me?" He leaned slightly closer. I haven't figured it out yet, but I'll find out. The car pulled up softly in front of her building. Evelyn looked out the window, feeling the relief mixed with the nagging feeling that it was far from over. Damien opened the door for her. "You'll be fine, Evelyn." For the time being. She got out of the car, her knees almost failing. When she turned to protest, he was already leaning against the door, watching her with that look that made her feel naked. "Good evening," he said, as if they had just come out of a casual dinner and not a kidnapping. The car drove off soon after, disappearing into the darkness of the street. Evelyn stood there, with the certainty that her life would never be the same again. Evelyn entered the building, feeling her legs trembling. The elevator seemed too slow, each floor adding to the sense that somehow Damien was still around, watching her. When he arrived at his apartment, he locked the door quickly and leaned his back against it, trying to catch his breath. What the hell had just happened? Kidnapped, interrogated, and released, as if it were just another ordinary day in his life. But what scared her most was not what Damien had done. It was what he had not done. He could have threatened her. He could have erased her from the city without a trace. But no, he brought her back. And the worst, he made it clear that it was not over yet. Evelyn ran her hands over her face and threw herself on the couch, staring at the ceiling. His life was simple. It was. A legal assistant who spent her days resolving contracts and dealing with demanding bosses. So how did it end up on the radar of a man like Damien Calloway? His cell phone vibrated. The fright made his heart race. He picked up the device with trembling fingers. It was a message from an unknown number. "Lock the doors. Don't open it to anyone. If someone asks about today, you don't know anything." D double quote. Evelyn's blood ran cold. She threw her cell phone away and hugged herself, feeling the weight of it all fall on her. It wasn't just a warning. It was a reminder. She could have gone home, but he was not free. It was scheduled. Evelyn spent the night awake, sitting on the couch, her knees bent against her chest, her cell phone next to her as if it were a bomb about to explode. Damien's message swirled in his head nonstop. "Lock the doors. Don't open it to anyone. If someone asks about today, you don't know anything." Was he protecting her or keeping her under surveillance? When the sun began to rise, his head throbbed. He decided he needed to act normally. If I walked into work looking like a woman who had been kidnapped by a mobster the night before, someone would notice. She took a quick shower, put on a simple outfit, and tied her hair in a bun. In the mirror, he tried to see the usual Evelyn, but that woman no longer existed. In the office, everything looked the same. Papers, phone calls, people passing by in a hurry. But for Evelyn, nothing was normal anymore. Every voice, every look, every different noise made his heart race. He sat down at the table and opened the computer, trying to concentrate. But as soon as he turned on the screen, a new email appeared. No sender. "The EU is in the EU," he said. Her stomach turned. He looked around, trying to look natural. Who had sent that? Damien? Or someone who knew what happened? Before he could take a deep breath, his boss, Larson, stopped by the table. "Evelyn, can you come to my office for a minute?" She froze. He forced a smile, trying to keep his composure. "Of course, Mr. Larson." He turned and entered the room, and she followed him, feeling her whole body tense. If Larson was involved in this, so she was in much more danger than she imagined. Evelyn walked into Larson's office, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and the boss indicated the chair in front of her with a casual gesture. "Sit down." She obeyed, trying to look relaxed, but inside was chaos. The email still echoed in his mind. "I told you so." Larson intertwined his fingers on the table and stared at her for a moment. His gaze was always calculated, but this time there was something different. "You look tired, Evelyn. How are you?" She moistened her lips. "Just a difficult night." He nodded slowly, as if weighing his words. "Well, I hope it doesn't affect your work. I need you to organize some important documents for me. They are confidential contracts. Only you will have access to them." Her stomach sank. Sensitive? Like the envelope she delivered at the nightclub? He forced a smile. Of course, Mr. Larson. Can you give me the details? He opened a drawer and pulled out a black briefcase. He placed it on the table and slid to it. You know how to proceed. I want this ready by the end of the day. Evelyn took the briefcase and stood up. You can leave it. She was already at the door when his voice made her freeze. By the way, she turned around slowly. Larson looked at her with an enigmatic half-smile. Did you find anyone interesting last night? Her blood ran cold. He knew. Evelyn forced the best misunderstood expression she could. Yesterday? No. I went straight home. Larson kept his smile for a moment longer, then gave a nod. Great. You can go back to work. She left the room feeling her legs weak. When he returned to his desk, he opened the briefcase with trembling hands. If Larson already knew, then why pretend he didn't? And more importantly, what exactly did she have on hand now? Evelyn returned to her desk feeling the weight of the briefcase in her hands as if it were a brick. She sat down, opened it slowly, and analyzed the documents inside her. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first glance, only contracts, numbers, legal clauses. But now, after the last night, she knew she needed to look beyond the obvious. Each page could hide something perilous, but what exactly did Larson want her to see? Or worse, what did he hope she wouldn't see? She took out her cell phone and typed a message before she could convince herself otherwise. I need to talk to you. The number Damien used to send the message last night was still there. She hesitated for a second before pressing send. The answer came almost immediately. I knew he would come back to me. A shiver ran through his body. That's not it. But there's something wrong. Something big. This time it took a little longer. When the answer came, her stomach sank. Get out of there. Now. Evelyn looked up slowly. The office looked the same as ever. Phones ringing. Employees passing by with folders and cups of coffee. Larson in his office, calm, impassive. But now she saw it differently. She was not just there as an assistant. I was in the middle of something much bigger. And if it was, maybe he wouldn't go out anymore. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn closed her briefcase, grabbed her purse, and stood up. Where are you going? Her colleague at the next table asked. Evelyn smiled, trying to disguise her haste. I need to solve something. She walked across the office without looking back. When he reached the street, a black car was parked on the other side. Damien was in the driver's seat, sunglasses covering his gaze, but his body relaxed, as if he already knew she was coming. Evelyn stopped on the sidewalk. One step in that direction meant there was no turning back. Damien lowered his glasses and arched an eyebrow. Are you going to stand there or are you going to come in? She looked at the building behind her. She looked at him. Then, without saying anything, he opened the car door and got in. As the engine roared and the world she knew was left behind, Evelyn understood one thing. That was his new reality, and Damien Calloway wouldn't let her get away anytime soon. As the car drove through the city, Evelyn felt her heart race, but it wasn't just fear. There was something else there, something that had been growing since the first time her eyes met his. Damien looked at her sideways and smiled from the side, a smile that carried danger and promise at the same time. You don't trust me, do you? He asked, his voice hoarse, loaded with something that made her shiver. Evelyn let out a sigh and looked away from the road. I don't even know if I trust myself now. He laughed softly and without warning took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. The warmth of his touch was intense, firm, as if to say, without needing words, that she was not alone. So, trust this, he whispered, bringing his hand to her lips and placing a soft kiss on her skin. Evelyn felt a shiver run through her body. She still didn't know where that road would take her, but one thing was certain. She was attached to Damien Calloway in a way that not even the danger could undo. And so Evelyn is faced with a choice that could change her life forever. Damien Calloway isn't just a danger. He's a promise of something irresistible, intense, and unknown. But how far is she willing to go? Can you trust him? Or is it giving itself to a man who can destroy it? If you've been stuck in this story and want more engaging plots like this, subscribe to the channel now. Don't forget to leave the like and share it with someone who loves stories full of passion and mystery. And of course, we want to know your opinion. What would you do in Evelyn's place? Comment below and also tell us where you are watching from. Now don't stop here. On the screen, there is already a link to the next video with another story that will hook you from beginning to end. Click and continue this journey.